popular New South Wales Premier Chris Minns announced that the New South Wales public servants will be required to return to the office full-time. The decision drew widespread support from business groups and managers, as you understand, and fury from highly pampered fat cat public servants who have become accustomed to being paid to work 5 days, to being paid 5 days and working 3.
You're one of the best users of adjectives that I've ever come across.
I'm not sure that's a compliment or an insult. I'll take it as a compliment. The furious public servants anonymously vented their frustration on an Australian public service subreddit, claiming the decision was, in inverted commas, out of touch given the high cost of living. One public servant claimed, you can force staff into the city, but you can't force them to buy things like coffee, lunch, and nor be vibrant and just be a bunch of sad sacks walking around. Another one argued it's a massive pay cut. These people won't be eating out or spending anywhere because they lost a few hours of travel time. And a third claimed, if this happens, we should make a concerted effort to bring pre-made lunch and boycott CBD venues.
That's disgraceful.
Remember, these people are paid by the taxpayer.
That's disgraceful. They're basically saying, I want to screw over businesses in the city. That's the way I want to punish the government. I want to screw businesses in the city.
And the government is not some mythical, but government is everyone. We fund the government. So the government just acts to spend taxpayer money.
And this is not some right-wing, crazy pro-business, anti-worker government. It's a Labor government.
Yeah. I think a very sensible government, we should add, but a notionally Labor government.
I agree, but it's not some far right-wing,
screw
the workers, support business. Yeah. That's not this government.
No, it's not. But unsurprisingly, Victoria's socialist government couldn't wait to announce that it wouldn't be asking public servants to work a full-time week, with desperately unpopular Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen boasting that any public servant from New South Wales who wants flexibility in their workplace should consider moving to Victoria. Of course, Jacinta has no issue spending billions of dollars of taxpayer monies on stuff like unwanted suburban rail loops. But how out of touch is Victoria? Or is it Chris Minns who's out of touch? Who has got this right and who has got this wrong?
Well, it depends who you ask. I mean, obviously, many people believe they would rather work at home than go into an office. I think, in my honest heart of hearts, I think it's worse for them, as you do, as a person. And I think they're wrong in having that feeling. But I also feel like I personally don't have an issue where in particular jobs people can work a day a week from home. I mean, the world is doing jobs now, which, like I've said this a few times, like nobody would have even known what these jobs were 100 years ago and maybe not even 50 years ago. And so like probably you can do a day a week from home. But I definitely think this, like ultimately, firstly, I want to totally disagree that's a pay cut. Like definitely there's some commuter cost attached to it. And so that's a reduction. And like a train, let's say it's $5 or $6 each way, but then you get a discount over time, right? Because if you travel a certain number of times per month, you can then travel for free essentially. And so, there's some cost attached to that. And so do you call that a pay cut? Maybe. But when they say we're not going to go out in the city, I have to tell you that when I go and sit in a cafe in suburbia for lunch, it's full in the middle of the week. And so presumably they are eating at cafes in suburbia, not packing their own lunch at home or making their lunch at home. So, I think a lot of this is smokescreen. What's really going on here is people are saying, I would rather work at home. And I hate the government for making me work in the office. And all the rhetoric is just some version of that. And if you say to me, ideologically, what do I think? I think society is worse without community. Like Homo sapiens have evolved to not be lone animals. And the idea that people just work from home, I don't think is healthy for society. And I think it's probably not good for business either. And so I like the idea that people gather together and work together for a significant part of the week. And I don't know if it's 5 days or 4 days. I don't think it's 3 days probably for most roles. And I think the idea that a government would boast about not making people come into an office, especially when they're funded and paid for by the taxpayer and they're called public servants, I just think that's a terrible mistake for a government and for the state, and also, frankly, for the individuals that it involves. And I would almost bet on the fact that if we fast forward 5 years, that's not going to be the case in 5 years. I think that it's going to be the New South Wales case in 5 years.
Yeah, I think that last point, the reason this whole work from home debacle has been able to continue, obviously we had the COVID debacle, so debacle on debacle, but the reason why work from home was able to prosper was not just the COVID thing. It was because there was a massive imbalance that shifted from probably too far in favour of capital to too far in favour of labour. And now we've shifted back the other way, and it's probably gone from being balanced to being probably now slightly in favour of capital. And we see when we put job ads out, we've seen our turnover drop to almost zero. Certainly our regretted turnovers dropped to pretty much zero. And you see that there's almost been hundreds of thousands of layoffs across the tech sector globally. Days of free money allowing people, so free money so we had the ZERP era, money went into investors, be it venture funds to private equity funds to share market funds. That money then got pumped into businesses, which got pumped into staff because they bid up the price of labour. That ridiculous ZERP phenomenon has gone hopefully for the rest of our lifetime. So the days of the power being shifted in front of labour to so far to labour is now gone. So we're not going to have this scenario where it's bad for staff, as you said, terrible for staff to be working from home, certainly every day and probably multiple days. So it's against their own interests. But even if you've led that aside, the notion that Labor can bully capital into something that's against everyone's interests is now gone. So that, and Cynthia Allen to so misread this, and she's a CEO of Victoria. She's a steward of capital of Victorian taxpayers. And the fact that she's willing to burn this capital shows how unfit she is for this position. And she needs to go ASAP. She's Joan Kerner plus 30 years.
I will say on the idea of working in the office or working in general, I don't think there's anything gospel or set in stone that says a work week should be 5 days. Like that is actually a relatively new concept to begin with. Like the weekend didn't exist for most of, the industrialized history for most workers. And even in the 90s when I was in Israel, when I first went there
6
for an
days.
extended period, like I think people had like Friday afternoon off and Saturday off, and Sunday, as it is still now, work day, and Friday wasn't a full weekend day. And so that changed over time. I think the tech sector really mostly led that change. And so I don't know if people should work 5 days. Maybe people should work 4 days. And maybe if the whole society worked 4 days, actually the efficiency would increase such that the productivity might be the same. Definitely there's productivity problems going on in Australia at the moment. Like we're struggling to get any productivity gains in the country despite technological advances. And so I don't know the answer to like 5 days is the gospel that you have to have a 5 day work week.
I mean, just on that, the problem with 4 day weeks, if you're a tech worker, whatever, if you're on the front lines, if you're working at McDonald's, if you're working as a taxi driver, if you're working as a tram driver, if you're working all customers, people want to be served. We want to do stuff on Sundays. The days of take out Western Australian listeners, but the days that are 5 days and 2 days weekends, nothing is long gone. We want to be doing stuff every single day. It's highly unfair to say, frontline workers, you can work these days, but rich tech workers, you can have 4 days.
No, but
and media workers have 4 days. How does that work?
Well, because I think you would just have more employment. And I don't know what I think about pay for 4 days versus 5 days.
More employment. Are we paying people more, or what? Businesses are making less money?
Like,
or how does this work?
I know. Do you leave the salary the same for 4 days? Probably you have to, or else then it's just working 80%.
20% pay rise, which doesn't work.
And so I don't know what I think about that, but I know what I definitely think about work from home. I think the idea that people should work from home asymptoting to 100% of their work week is a terrible idea for the individual and a terrible idea for society. And people might say, who am I to go and tell people what's good for them as an individual? And my cynical answer to that might be, I just sound like I'm on the far left when I say things like that. But actually what I think is the job of a government is to try and figure out what's best for people and then to enact laws to implement what they think is best for people. And if people don't agree, they vote them out. And so, long and the short is, I think, credit to Chris Minns for being prepared to stand up fundamentally for what he thinks is the right decision. And I
love this guy. What a run of leaders. I think Dominic Perrottet was fantastic. I think Gladys was okay. Chris has been fantastic. So compare that to Victoria, which has been just a basket case. And this is probably why Victoria is such a basket case and why
absolutely
Israel's going so well.